Yo, what is up guys, Grim here, and in today's video we're going to be taking a look at Luocha and how good he actually is. The number one question on a lot of people's minds is he the best healer, and if he is, how much better than the other healers is he actually? And in order to answer that, we're going to be doing quite a lot of tests against Memory of Chaos 10 Side 1, which is considered to be the hardest healing challenge right now, and we're going to pit Luocha up against all of the other healing characters to see how he stacks up in terms of performance. Does he smash the competition, or is it super duper close? And that should give us a pretty good answer on whether or not he is as powerful as people say, a must pull, future proof, or anything in between. So without further ado, let's get into it. The characters we'll be including in this test are characters I believe have the potential to solo sustain a team at the highest level when up against some pretty crazy damage output. The only character I think might be missing here is March 7th, but maybe we'll get to her later on. The characters we'll be testing though are Bailu, Gepard, Natasha, and Luocha. Now, in order to make sure we give everyone a fair shot, we're going to be doing the tests quite thoroughly. We've got two separate team compositions that every healer will be taking part in. The first one we've got here is a Sale Hyper Carry team, which we're going to test every healer in and see if they're capable of keeping alive, and if so, how well. The second team here is a Clara Hyper Carry team, which we're also going to test every healer in and see how well they perform. Each one of these teams will be run through Memory of Chaos 10 Side 1 3 times. So we'll be doing 3 Clara Luocha runs, 3 Clara Natasha runs, etc. And we're going to take the best run of those 3 and include it in the results. Now that we've got our tests laid out, we need a way to decide which of the healers is going to be strongest. So we need to have a few different ways to understand who performed better than others. Now, the first and most important thing I think for most healers is ensuring that they can keep the entire team alive, which is definitely no small feat when they are solo. For me at least, I'm always looking to try and get that 3 out of 3 stars, so ensuring no teammates go down and everyone survives is my first priority. So the first thing we're going to be tracking is how many deaths occur in the best run for each of these healers for both the Clara and the Sale teams. Now that's not good enough alone though, we need something else to determine their performance. So the other thing after deaths that I'm generally looking at is how many skill points the healer is using in order to keep everybody alive. The fewer skill points your healer uses to heal, the more skill points you'll have to focus on utility or extra damage, which should allow you to get further on in Memory of Chaos and most likely achieve way more stars, meaning you're going to be able to get to that 30 out of 30 point much better. And of course, if a character uses more, that doesn't necessarily mean they're bad, it just means that they're maybe not as competitive. The last thing we're going to be checking here is how many cycles the team takes to clear Memory of Chaos with in their best run with that healer present. This should give us a little bit of an idea of whether or not a character like Luocha has meaningful contributions from his damage if they're able to save a cycle or so at all. And those overall should give us a pretty clear picture of which healer is strongest if Luocha is incredibly far ahead, and if so, by how much. Alright, first up on the testing chopping block here is Luocha, but a big part of ensuring this test is fair is making sure that each character has access to a good gear set and also a good light code. So I'm going to be showing you guys the gear I used roughly on each of the characters here. I have had to reconstruct the sets after filming, so they might not be exact, but it's pretty damn close to exactly what I used here. Alright, so this is pretty much what I was rocking on him. I was rocking the 4-piece Wild Wheat and the 2-piece Fleet of the Ageless, focusing primarily on speed, attack, and outgoing healing. We were using his signature light cone and an energy recharge rope. And overall, we were aiming just to get as much healing as possible and not focus too much on the damage side of things here. But we do have some critical strike rating and crit damage by accident, so we should get a pretty reasonable feel for how much damage he can deal as well. Of course, it is worth noting that my Luocha is Eidolon 0 and the light cone he's using is S1 as well. And he doesn't have all of his traces unlocked, and the ones he does have unlocked are only at level 7. And of course, if you're new to Luocha, you can go ahead and check out my Luocha guide. It has pretty much everything you need to know about him. We're going to be using the reactive rotation in this video from that guide. Alright, let's get into how Luocha performed in those tests though. First up is going to be seeing how he fared with a Sele hypercarry team solo. So overall, Sele and Luocha aren't the most powerful team in terms of synergy, but they're definitely not bad either. Sele definitely attacks very quickly, and she can also get her resets from slaying enemies. The reason this is important is while Luocha's field is active, every single extra attack is going to trigger an AoE heal on the team. Now, the combination of Sele and Luocha essentially creates an invulnerable fortress while that field is active, thanks to all the resets, thanks to the speed, and thanks to the frequent ultimates. So the name of the game really was just keeping the field up as long as possible. And for the most part, that definitely wasn't too much trouble. I was actually shocked at how well Luocha performed in endgame with the gear that I gave him. For the most part, I didn't have to use a skill at all, and in my best run, I simply didn't. If we get into the results here for the Luocha and Sele team, we used 0 skill points, had 0 deaths, and completed the entire Memory of Chaos 10 side 1 here in 1 cycle. So it definitely was a pretty good performance here, but I think that does boil down to Sele being pretty overpowered with the gear that she's got on, so we're definitely not gonna have to read into that too much. But it is fair to say that as long as you sequence all of your stuff right, Luocha plays out a lot better in reality than I think a lot of people initially thought, myself included. While the field is active, there's pretty much a 0% chance that anyone is going to die on your team, as long as you have a carry who attacks pretty quickly. And then as soon as the field wears off, chances are someone on your team is going to get hit hard enough, they'll go below 50% life, and that's going to trigger his automatic skill, putting the field straight back up because you'll have your ultimate active then as well. Essentially creating a scenario in which the field is up most of the time without consuming any skill points at all, and that is incredibly powerful. So yeah, it's no surprise that he used 0 skill points, had 0 deaths, and was able to complete it very, very quickly. The next test was Luocha with Clara as the main carry. So what's interesting about a Clara team is that pretty much all of the damage that your team's gonna take is gonna be for the most part concentrated on Clara. So it really does promote a more single target healing scenario, which is a pretty different test from the Sele team from earlier. As Luocha is primarily an AoE healer, I think it'd be a pretty interesting thing to see. In addition to that, Clara also does damage substantially slower than Sele, at least my one does, because she doesn't have any Eidolons or anything like that. So it should also be a little bit more of an accurate representation of how things are going to go in a less invested fight. So with my Luocha and Clara team here, we actually still managed to use 0 skill points for the entire fight. And mostly the fight actually played out very similarly to the Sele team. While the field was active, we were basically nigh invincible thanks to Clara constantly counterattacking every time with the field active. As soon as the enemy hits you, you're essentially immediately healed all the way back, all the life you just lost, with interest and on the entire team. So you're basically completely invincible while the field is active. And as soon as the field falls off and you stop receiving that healing, chances are Clara is going to get completely obliterated in 1 or 2 hits, maybe a few more. She's going to fall below 50% HP. The automatic heal will trigger. That'll give you a lot of energy, or enough energy hopefully, to get your ultimate back, and then you can immediately trigger the field once again. And then you'll be going straight back to healing infinitely. So it really does create an invulnerable fortress with Clara. Now, the next thing to look at is, of course, we had no deaths, but how many cycles did we get it done in? Well, definitely slower than Sele. We got it done in 4 cycles here. So 0 skill points used, 0 deaths, and 4 cycles. I really don't think you could ask much more from a solo healer than what Luocha provides. So now that we've tested Luocha, the question is, how does he stack up against the competition? And is there anyone who comes close to his insane performance that he displayed in Memory of Chaos 10? Well, I wanted to test Gepard next because he is the most different and interesting. I've built my Gepard here with pretty much pure defense and speed, and he is of course idle on 0 and is using S1 of his signature, very similar to Luocha. We do have an energy recharge rope here on him to give him a little bit more leeway on getting his shields up, so overall I think it should be a pretty fair comparison between the two. Next, we want to see what happens when we run the 2 tests from earlier, but instead of using Luocha, we use Gepard in his place. So let's go through the results first. So on the Sele side of things, Gepard was actually able to pull out some pretty incredible results. Compared to Luocha, who got a clear in only 1 cycle with 0 deaths and 0 skill points used, Gepard actually had identical results. He also got down the Memory of Chaos 10 side 1 in 1 cycle with 0 deaths and 0 skill points used with Sele. So they're definitely on par in terms of when it comes to sustaining the team in that specific scenario. Now when it comes to Clara though, we've got some other results to consider here. So Luocha got it done in 4 cycles with 0 deaths and 0 skill points used. Gepard also got it done in 4 cycles with 0 deaths and only 1 skill point used, so he did fall behind a little bit there in skill point economy. Now for the most part though, I would consider these guys on par in terms of their sustaining capabilities, but I do want to make a point here. The reason that I think that Luocha might be a little bit better is that while I was playing Gepard, my team was taking damage. They weren't gonna be like fully shielded the entire time at 100% HP. My Luocha team ended at 100% HP, and my Gepard team ended at like pretty unhealthy percentage HP, but they both got the job done. It feels like Luocha is more comfortable though. Luocha also does have the team cleanse and the enemy dispel, and that's definitely not something you can ignore either. Now overall, I do think they both fill a pretty similar role, and I'd probably rank them pretty similarly on a tier list, but I definitely would prefer Luocha as the solo sustainer, at least for most characters in the game. Now, one other surprising thing here is that Gepard actually provided a very good support option here for Clara, a character I was not expecting him to do well with, which is a bit of a tangent here, but I would have thought that Gepard would have led Clara to do substantially less damage and complete the cycle slower, but that definitely wasn't the case. Thanks to cleave damage, AoE damage, and the team composition we have here, Clara was completely able to perform just as well with Gepard as her healer. Pretty cool. Next up, we have Natasha, our first 4-star healer. Now, she is going to be at E6, and she is using Bailu's signature to put her on somewhat more of an even playing field here. Now, we've of course built her maximum speed, we've got energy recharge on her, and we've been stacking as much HP as we can without going healing. So I think this should be a reasonable representation of a pretty damn well geared Natasha. Overall, it should be pretty similar to the amount of gear the other characters have. So let's dive into her test results and see how she did compared to the other two. So next up is seeing how Natasha, a 4-star healer, performs against these 5-star juggernauts. Let's compare her directly to Luocha to understand how things play out. So Luocha and Sele were able to get it done in 1 cycle with 0 deaths and 0 SP used, but Natasha unfortunately wasn't able to put out the same results. Unfortunately, a member of her team on one of her runs every single time always died when she was solo, so she had 1 death even in her best run. And even in that run, she had to use a skill point as well, and she got it done in 1 cycle slower. So she definitely is quite substantially worse, at least in this test here, compared to Luocha and even Gepard. Now, when comparing her with the Clara setup, let's take a look at the results. So Luocha got it done in 4 cycles with 0 deaths and 0 SP used. But Natasha unfortunately still had a death in all 3 of her attempts, meaning she's definitely not that viable as a solo healer even with Clara. Now, she did get it done though, even with the death, but unfortunately it was a slower cycle amount. She got it done in 5 cycles instead of the 4. And she also used a whopping 5 skill points to keep people alive even up to that point. So even with Clara, she is quite substantially worse than Luocha. It's definitely very clear. Now, the reason that Natasha didn't perform as well, at least for me, is the fact that she didn't have any form of sustain outside of the turns where she was using either her skill or her ultimate. When the team went low, you'd use your ultimate and top them all back up, but after then, more hits would come in and you'd have to start using skills, but that's only single target and things quickly got out of control fast. Meaning you had to use a lot of skill points, team members started dying, and overall there wasn't any way to protect the entire team in between using her ultimates, leading to the result we see here. So the last character to take a look at here is Bailu, and we've built her pretty much identically to Natasha. We've got big HP, big healing output, we've got speed, and we've got as much energy recharge as we can get. She's using her signature light cone at S1, and she is E0 here. So overall, it's pretty damn similar, and I think it's a reasonable set of gear compared to everyone else we've shown so far. So let's get into the test results. The last person to take a look at results for is Bailu. Now, Sally is up first. So Luocha, of course, got it done in 1 cycle with 0 deaths and 0 SP used, but Bailu got it done in 2 cycles with 0 deaths and 1 SP used. So she got it 1 cycle slower and 1 more SP used. Now, the overall reason for this, I would say, is that SP really does matter a whole lot more when you're talking such low cycle limits here. So that probably was the tipping point. 1 extra Sele skill, 1 extra Bronya skill, an extra Tinyun skill, something along those lines would have led to the lower uptime. But at the end of the day, the thing is, Bailu does have to use her skill occasionally in high damage, risky situations here. She isn't able to rely on the perpetual shields like Gepard, and she's not able to rely on the force field, life field like Luocha can. She's got to use skill points to get the team up and healthy. After her ultimate's not up and invigoration wears off, that is the crux of the issue here. So she does use that skill point, she gets the slower heal here. Let's see how she does with Clara though. So with Luocha and Clara, we got 4 cycles, 0 deaths, and 0 SP used. But with Bailu, we also got 4 cycles, 0 deaths, and 2 SP used. So similar clear times, no deaths, and 2 skill points used instead of 0. So definitely Luocha has an edge here, but Bailu isn't that far behind either. Bailu overall was a pretty comfortable healer to use, but it was definitely very noticeable that she used skill points and required the use of skills. And that definitely is a bit of a demerit in her direction here, because every skill point you use on the healer is not like using 1 skill point, it's kind of like using 2, because instead of building 1, you're using 1. So you're losing the skill point you would have gained and actually spending 1. So you're going minus 2 skill points every time you use a skill, which is pretty impactful. So where does that leave us, and what is the answer to our Luocha questions here? Well, based on our tests here, which is a very small look at Luocha's overall potential and how he might perform, I think it's pretty easy to say that Luocha definitely feels like the best healer in the game right now. He performed the best in the tests and also has a lot more in his kit which other healers don't have access to right now. He can rip off buffs from enemies, he can also cleanse allies, has pretty good break potential which can come into play more in other fights, and overall, he was the most comfortable healer to play by a long shot, so I definitely think he's got big points there. He also has a lot of future synergies potentially with destruction characters, namely the upcoming character Blade. Blade is a character who is likely going to have upwards of 6,000 total life and continually damages himself to deal rotational damage. Healing that up definitely seems like a bit of a chore for any other character right now other than Luocha. So he definitely looks like he's got a niche there as well. So answering the question, is he the best healer? In my opinion, yes. Is he a must pull? Well, if you already have Gepard and Bailu, they're both capable of solo sustaining the team. So I don't think he's a must pull if you already have those characters. And overall, it's really going to come down to the state of your account. Now, if you have Natasha and one or none of those other characters, he definitely feels like a much higher priority pull if you care about meta at all. Solo sustaining allows you to get a whole lot more damage on your team and can cut the amount of cycles you complete a Memory of Chaos side in half. So it's definitely a big damage boost and can be a pretty big benefit. TLDR, if you have Bailu and Gepard, probably not a must pull. If you have only Bailu or only Gepard or neither of them, he definitely seems like a pretty attractive pull as he is really strong. But it's going to be down to you guys whether or not you actually feel like you need him. Now, what about his future-proofness? How is he going to feel in the coming patches when more characters are released with abundance paths? Well, I think that Luocha is probably the all-round strongest healer that we're going to have for a while. He is completely focused on healing output and has the utility to back it up. One thing he doesn't have without Eidolons though is any way to provide additional damage buffs or support to the entire team. I could definitely see a scenario in which we have a hybrid abundance/harmony or abundance/nihility character come out, which feels like it might power creep him. If a character that comes out can solo sustain like Luocha can, but also provide a lot more utility in terms of damage buffs or debuffs to the enemy, we might see a scenario in which he isn't considered the strongest healer anymore. But right now, that doesn't seem to be the case, and I definitely think he's a very strong pick. Of course, both teams are going to need a sustaining character, and that means that he'd have to be power crept twice. Right now he's the strongest, so we're going to need another character that comes out which is the strongest again, and then we'd need another character on top of that which again power creeps him to the point where he would hit the bench if you had all three of those characters. So I really don't think he's a very bad investment. Is he the best healer? Yes. Is he a must pull? Not really, unless you absolutely feel you need him to be competitive. And is he future proof? For the most part, I wouldn't be worried about pulling him myself. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you feel like it was worth watching, make sure to let the algorithm know by liking the video and subscribing. If you have any questions or comments, definitely comment down below, and I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.